Hello, my name's Justin. I've been a DM for 7 years now, and I wanted to create this series just to share my personal advice for writing and also being a dungeon master and creating a D&D group with friends. I've seen and talked to a lot of people who want to start DMing and they just don't have the time, or they feel like they don't have the skill. And I just personally don't believe that you do not have the skill. You just need a little help to unlock that doorway. This is going to be the first episode in a series where I just explain all the stuff that I've gone through, all the stuff that I've learned, that I've experienced, that I feel like needs to be taught. Now, there are videos online that also teach you this, but I just wanted to share my piece, not because I'm like some important person or anything like that. It's just because, why not? I'm just going to talk about it. It's like completely unstructured. I'm going to improv it. Let's see how this goes. Today's topic is going to be about villains. This is something that I've seen come up a lot of times, especially amongst my friends and other people who ask me for advice in D&D. How can you compose an interesting and villainous villain without being edgy? I'm about to teach you what I do to make villains through inspirations in media that I've grown up with. Let's get started. The first thing you got to know is that there's many types of villains, right? Everybody who's watched a movie or has understood at least one piece of media knows that there are multiple types of villains. You got like crazy, megamaniacal villains like Emperor Palpatine, but then you also got villains who are like brutes, like Darth Vader, Bane, top of my head, Darth Sion from Knights of the Old Republic 2. That's a brute. Another brute. Broly. I'm talking about Broly from the old movies. Oh hell, that guy's a brute. But what I've noticed, and especially when it comes to my writing, that I focus all of these tropes: megamaniacal, brute, the beast, the authority figure, the machine. I'm reading some right now, right? The big bad, the femme fatale, the anti-villain. All of these villains fall into two distinct categories when I start writing: an indirect villain and a direct villain. An indirect villain is a villain who has existed beyond or will exist disconnected from the main character. A villain who will exist and has existed and is not connected at all to the main cast. Let me give you a great example. I don't got a minifigure of him, but Sauron from Lord of the Rings. Bro has existed for thousands of years before the events of the story. Bro turns evil. Bro goes on this crazy path. He's the certified op for at least half the cast of the story, but he's not directly related to any except maybe Gandalf, but not Frodo. Frodo, Sam, and the gang, they have the ring, or Frodo has the ring. No, it was all happenstance. Isildur died, and the ring flew down the river, and eventually Gollum got it, and then eventually Frodo got it. Sauron is completely disconnected from the main cast. That is an indirect villain. Another example that is an indirect villain is the Joker. I got a little minifigure of him right here so you can see, right? The Joker, in some iterations, is made by the Batman when he wears the Red Hood costume and he gets tossed into the pit. I'm not talking about that one. I'm talking about the Joker from the Dark Knight trilogy. The Joker in those movies is completely disconnected from Batman. We don't even know his origins, and he's an acting force that acts independent of the main character, right? And then, with the things that he does, the actions that he commits, it leads to the events in the story and the challenges that Batman has to face, right? That is an indirect villain. Someone who is disconnected from the main cast, but still has an active role in the story and is acting even before or after the main character has their little run-in with them. Now, the more common type of villain is a direct villain, a villain who is completely and directly tied to our main characters, right? Best example, Darth Vader. Bro's the father. That means no matter what Luke does, his story will always tie with Anakin's. And not even bringing in the prophecy stuff, Darth Vader, as Anakin, as a main character, had a direct villain as well. Emperor Palpatine.
Oh, but my belly hurts, Vader. Please, Lord Vader, get me Pepto-Bismol. I need my Pepto-Bismol.
Emperor Palpatine is a direct villain to Vader, a direct villain to Anakin. He directly influences his life and influences his decisions. In the process of doing so, started the events of the Star Wars franchise. And the thing about Palpatine is that he also is a direct villain to Luke. Luke Skywalker's father is Darth Vader, and Darth Vader is the apprentice to the Emperor, Darth Sidious. And because of that, Luke has to defeat the Emperor, or have his father, which is Luke's goal, to redeem his father so that they can defeat the Emperor. And that is a direct mark on Luke's story. Luke's journey would not be complete if he didn't face the Emperor. Another direct villain that is from a really funny show, Ninjago, Lord Garmadon. Lord Garmadon, as well as Darth Vader, is the father to one of the main characters / main character, Lloyd, right? Lloyd would not be the dude that we know if he was not the son of Garmadon. Sensei Wu wouldn't even have the ninja, Kai Cole J Zane, if Garmadon wasn't acting like an op back in season 1. The skeletons. That is a direct villain. A villain whose entire story revolves around the main cast. Now, why did I bring up these two types of villains? Every good D&D campaign needs one of these two villains. Either a villain that is tied to your player's backstory, or a villain that has existed in the world. Here is where the kicker comes in. Every villain you make, even if they're indirect, will eventually connect with the main cast. Remember, the most important tenet of D&D and creating a tabletop experience is that this is an interactive story. Every single player is the main character of their own story. As a DM, you have to realize that this is a group storytelling experience and that every person is cooperating in their own ways. And that's one of the goals and purposes of being a DM that I've learned, which is to curate everybody's stories together and so that they all match and link up. You can have a villain that is tied to someone's backstory, that is also tied to the world, and that is tied to other people's backstories. For example, let's say you want to create an antagonist who killed a character's father. What if you design it that this villain didn't just kill the father of your character directly, but he's a king. I want my character to come from a village that was burnt down, and that's why they became an adventurer. Well, what if the people who burnt down the village were the soldiers of the king, who is the villain in another player's backstory? Now, let's say none of your players want to have a villain in their backstory, right? And you have a cool idea for an antagonist in a story, like Strahd. Strahd is an indirect villain. But as a DM, you have the unique experience to weave Strahd into your character's stories. He starts as an indirect villain. The characters have to stop him to leave. They have to defeat Strahd because he's a bad guy. But what you can do is, as the story goes on, Strahd becomes more and more enamored with the party, and he becomes more and more directly involved in their lives. He can start threatening their religious beliefs, damaging their moral values, right? You can have Strahd, an indirect villain, start challenging the fibers of the party. Find a way for this villain to act like a chess master to cause your players to go after them. Because the most important thing you should do when creating a villain for Dungeons & Dragons is creating an antagonist that the players want to defeat. When making a villain and having them interact with your character's backstories and morals, you create an antagonist that the players will want to defeat. If this villain has caused all the events to unfold, as well as killing the NPC, as well as foiling their plans, and as well as challenging who they are morally, the players are going to be like, we need to kill this guy. This guy's an op. We need to take him down. Now, something else I wanted to talk about when it comes to villains. When creating a cool villain, you need 3 things. You need aura, you need action, motivation. Aura, action, motivation. To make a S-tier villain, aura, action, and motivation, one of them needs to be substituted with the other. If you have a character that is all motivation and all action, and then you try to have their aura be crazy, they become edgy. You have a character with a sad backstory, like their family got murdered and they want to take over the world so that they can cause peace or whatever, some crazy bullcrap, right? They then proceed to do it, but then you have their aura be insanely crazy. Players are going to be like, all right, this dude's just a lame-o. And that sucks because you can have the best motivations in the world, the best backstory in the world, but if you go over the top with all 3, players are going to think it's edgy. Players are going to think that it's upsetting. And I know this from personal experience. I've created villains who I genuinely believe have the craziest motivation and they do the craziest stuff in the story. But then when I introduce their aura or I introduce them as like unbeatable, players are just like, dude, what were you cooking with this? Let's say you have a villain I just described, a villain who has crazy motivations, crazy actions, but you choose not to make them have crazy aura, right? Somebody like a king or a duke, some authority dude who has really good motivations for acting the way that he does, but then does things that are incredibly awful that interact with the party, but you purposefully don't give him aura. You make him like a normal guy. And then people are like, man, this villain's super interesting, because if the people love him as a king, but he's an awful person, then this is a complicated fight. But then, hear me out, in the campaign, when the players start affecting the king, he then gets angry. He gets angrier and angrier, and his actions get worse, and then he loses the pathway of his motivations. He eventually falls against his morals, but in doing so, he makes a deal with the darkness and gets aura. That's how you do it. And it was a natural progression of the character's arc. But if you start off with all three, then it doesn't work out. Because here's the final thing I'll talk about in this video. When creating a villain and doing all these things I said, choosing if they're direct or indirect, choosing which of the three paths you want to substitute for the other, right? All of that will eventually tie into the final thing. And that is development. Every good antagonist for your D&D campaign has to evolve. Even someone like Strahd should evolve as the story continues. Because if you have a one-note antagonist from beginning to end, even if you follow everything I said right now, players will not love them as much as characters who evolve. Creating an arc is incredibly easy. You just have to come up with a reason why they lose one thing for the other. A villain who is a complete manipulator loses his ability to manipulate because of the players, and because of that he loses his action, right? So now they just have to take down this incredibly powerful antagonist who doesn't have an army to help him. You have a villain who has no backstory, but because he gets nay-nayed by the players over and over again, they become his motivation to become even more villainous. You can't have a villain without an arc. So that's the advice I'm giving today. I hope you guys like this advice. I'll probably make another video. Hit me with suggestions. Make sure to check out my D&D channel. Hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you very much. Bye bye.